For a very long time, the most popular place to start a tech company has been Delaware. This has been the main area that Silicon Valley, VCs, et cetera, would prefer that you set up your company. And it has been very popular with, for example, foreign people who are wanting to set up a US LLC. However, recently, a lot of people are shutting down their Delaware incorporations and shifting them to other states. And for the last few years, we have not typically been forming companies in Delaware. And so today I'm going to talk to you about why you shouldn't form a company in Delaware, why you might want to consider some other place, and what some of those other places might be. So let's dive in and discuss it right now. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Thank you for being here. I am Michael. And if you are interested in optimizing your global tax, relocating abroad, paying the lowest legal amount of tax possible, we do international tax planning. We help you not only implement the best solution for you, but put it into practice by forming companies, opening bank accounts, hand walking you through a custom solution, step by step, from beginning to end, actually to getting you the result, as well as helping you to maintain it. So if that sounds interesting, you can either send a message through offshorecitizen.net, or you can book a call with me at calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, the link in the description below. All right, let's dive in and talk about this. So what was the big deal with Delaware? The big deal with Delaware historically was you were supposed to have laws and case law and something called the Chancery Court that would make it really attractive. In addition to this, Delaware had some favorable rules around tax. It has to do with some nexus rules, although there's technically Delaware state tax. The nexus rules were kind of very good in that regard. You were in a situation where if you wanted a court decision, you could have it quite quickly. The case law and the law itself meant that you would have relatively high certainty about how the courts would rule in your particular situation. And they were particularly favorable rules, mainly for investors in particular. So when you look at, I was mentioning Silicon Valley, VCs would tend to like to have companies set up in Delaware. The question is like, well, hang on, most of those VCs are based in California and San Francisco, the Bay Area. Why is it that they are not wanting a Californian company? And one of the reasons for that is not actually tax. Some people might think it's tax. No, you're going to get stuck in the California tax net, probably regardless if you have any sort of operations, et cetera there. California State Franchise Board is just like terrible. They're really, really brutal to deal with. I don't know why people do it, to be honest with you, but anyway, they do. So they would have that. But the thing was that the rights for founders tended to be somewhat better in California versus the rights for investors, which tended to be better in Delaware. So that was part of it. Another part of it, like I said, was this Chancery Court, which allowed you to get very quick court decisions, kind of go through quickly, et cetera. However, a few different things started to change. And I would say they started to change around the time that COVID happened. So first of all, the Delaware State Registry was historically very efficient, okay? Meaning that you could get companies formed super quickly, super easily, very straightforward. During COVID, they got super backed up, and it's really unclear why that would be, because it should be a pretty straightforward process, but this was just the reality. So as a result, you were waiting a long period of time to form companies there, and that was one of the things that caused us to start shifting a lot of the company formations that we're doing. We formed companies all over the world, so all sorts of international tax havens, European countries, Middle Eastern countries, Asian countries, and of course, US LLCs. And so when we were doing that, of course, we have to choose the states, and there's a variety of states that you can choose from. There's some pros and cons of each of them. Usually, although not always, you want some kind of privacy. You certainly want to consider state taxes, sales taxes. There's something called a franchise tax that exists in Delaware that doesn't exist in all places. So there's some considerations like that. And so we ended up shifting quite a bit away from there to places that were easier to deal with and typically lower cost. And so that was useful. However, Delaware has, on top of that, started to create a bunch of other problems. So what you might have seen, for example, is that they've got these kind of activist judges. And famously, one of the things that happened is one of them revoked Elon Musk's pay package. Now, you can kind of get in and discuss that whole thing. That's not kind of the context of this video. I think it was quite ridiculous that literally the board voted on it, shareholders voted on it twice, and they got it denied twice. And we'll see what happens as they run it through. But it's caused a lot of damage to the reputation of the state. So a ton of big companies are now incorporating in Texas or in Nevada. We historically didn't do that much in Nevada for a few different reasons. One was you ended up with some extra costs that didn't really seem like they added any value. And second of all, there were a bunch of cases where the reputation of Nevada meant that certain banking, et cetera, was a little bit more difficult, which is kind of interesting. Other places that you can look at are South Dakota, Wyoming, Florida. Those are probably the most common ones that one would consider getting set up. And there's pros and cons in either way. You can also look at New Mexico. You can look at some others. But you want to be careful because some of them have taxes that will be maybe a very small share, but still a tax on your total gross revenue. Like I said, you have state taxes in some cases. In some cases, you think, oh, I'm going to be in a great situation because I've got myself some extra privacy. For example, New Mexico historically had a lot more privacy than a lot of the other states, but there's some negative consequences on the back end of that. So it turned out to be not really ideal for a lot of people and their cases. Anyway, so you might look at that and you might say, okay, great. Well, so Tesla, Elon, this person who had a few shares ends up suing, which by the way, I think the most extractive, ridiculous thing there were the lawyers. So basically what happened was you had one shareholder who had hardly any shares who challenged this, decided to sue. It was like a class action lawsuit. These lawyers operated based on basically purely contingency. So they were getting paid based on the victory. But they decided to claim that they were entitled to like a few $1 billion for this. And I think they were awarded 300 and some million, which is pretty nuts. So you think that the shareholders, the shareholder actually got nothing. The shareholders themselves didn't benefit at all. In fact, it penalized them in some sense because they had to pay this penalty or this big fee to the lawyers through Tesla. Now, granted, Elon had the pay package revoked, and we'll see what happens with that down the road. There's some decent chance that it ends up costing Tesla a lot more on the back end of this because of the fact that it has to do with some tax complications. But anyway, it may end up being much worse in the long run. In the meantime, they've reincorporated in Texas, and we'll see where that goes. However, it's worth understanding that if you go and you do a bunch of research, what you'll recently see is that there is a massively disproportionate share of awards that have been given out in Delaware courts not favorable to the shareholders of these companies. And so a lot of the stuff that you kind of traditionally thought was going to give you benefit, actually it turns out can give you quite a bit of harm. And so for a combination of all these reasons, we no longer recommend Delaware. There's always like some edge case where it's like, okay, yes, this makes sense, right? There's no one size fits all, so I can't blanket tell you never do it. But for the most part, you should never do it. There are just better places to get set up. I would say that the easiest for most people is probably Wyoming, but again, there are pros and cons. And so to the extent that you're interested in like, okay, what is the best solution for me? Reach out to us. Happy to help you. Happy to help you, figure out what is the best solution, but also to set it up and form it for you. So anyway, if you need any help, check out our other videos. Reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video.